Let's talk about common myths in addiction. These are things I really hear every day, and these myths really prevent us from addressing addiction in a positive way. First, one of the biggest myths, and we've all heard it, I'm a functional alcoholic. This one, I used to use this on myself. Actually, when I first heard the term, probably in my 20s, and I heard functional alcoholic, I said, oh, that's me. Like it actually gave me a green light. I was like, I'm functional, but I can continue to use. I used that term to justify my use for really many years. You know, if we drop the word functional off of the term functional alcoholic, we're just left with alcoholic. One thing about functional alcoholic is we really want to look at the life of the person. Functional alcoholic, when somebody's describing themselves as that, usually it means I'm a working alcoholic. It means that they go to work, they bring home a paycheck, they show up to work every day. They don't show up to work drunk, maybe they do. But they're bringing home the money. What we're saying here is addiction has probably affected everything else in their life but work. And it's interesting. Work is usually the last thing that really affects an alcoholic. We know addiction is a progressive disease. You've seen it progress with your individual. People hold on to work. Like that's the last thing that they'll let fall apart. They never miss work. They always show up. How are they doing at work? You know, they might not be running at full cylinders at work, but more importantly, how's the rest of their life? Is the rest of their life functional? Usually not, you know, and that's if we look at how they're behaving around their kids, how they're behaving with their spouse partner, how they're behaving in the family. Usually all that stuff has fallen apart a long time ago. So just the fact that they can hold work together, that doesn't mean that we don't have to intervene and get them help. Rock bottom. This myth I don't like. Specifically because it sort of, we say this thing, oh, they just have to hit rock bottom. What we're saying here is we're going to stand back. We're going to let this problem get worse until they hit their rock bottom. Well, in the business that I'm in, you know, I can assure you that there is no rock bottom. It's interesting. One of a family just last week, they called me, the person got a DWI. And they said, for sure, this person's rock bottom. Well, what did the alcoholic do? The alcoholic didn't really process the DWI. The alcoholic processed that he was going to get back at the police. The alcoholic hired a good lawyer. It wasn't the fact that he was driving a car drunk. It was the fact that the police were there. The police caught him. These cops were unfair. The alcoholic should have been sort of the wake-up call that we've all been waiting for. Didn't process it as their rock bottom. They processed it as something that they have to get out of. They've got a rap that they've got to beat. Addiction, we've talked about it. Addiction is a disease. If we draw an analogy to any other disease, the family does not stand back and wait for a disease to get worse. If somebody was diagnosed with diabetes, the family would rally around that diabetes diagnosis. Same thing with addiction. Addiction is a disease. When we have that as a diagnosis, the family needs to rally around it. With diabetes, we don't say, oh, they should just eat more cake and not go to the doctor. The second we get any other diagnosis, the family engages around that diagnosis, and the family looks for the best doctors, looks for the best diet, looks for the best health care for that individual. We want to do the same thing here. We're not sitting back and saying the diabetes has got to get worse before we intervene. We're saying today's the day that we're going to intervene. We're not going to let that person hit rock bottom. Just a couple other ones. Every person in addiction has always said, oh, I'm going to try a moderation program. You know, at the point of addiction, usually moderation is way out the door. Usually people can or cannot drink. It's not something where they'll finally figure something out. They'll finally figure out how to have 3 drinks and stop. That's the goal of every alcoholic. I wish I could drink 3 drinks and stop, but I've proven time and time again, whenever I drink, I don't know what's going to happen. So I can't do moderation. Sort of an interesting thing about this, and my family members that are watching this, you know, non-addicted people without addiction problems, never try a moderation program. If you're watching this video and you're not addicted to drugs or alcohol, you don't sit and think, oh, today I'm only going to have 3. Today I'm only going to have 2. I'm going to limit how much I drink. You don't need to have that thought process. So just the fact that somebody's going through this thought process of moderation tells us that they've got an addiction. Doctor prescribed. A whole lot of people, they see one doctor, kind of a doctor that they might not normally see. You know, I don't want to hang any doctors out here, but if somebody wants to get a medication, if they want to get Xanax, if they, you know, this is happening an awful lot. Doctors can often prescribe marijuana. You can find a doctor, you can present your symptoms, and you can get yourself on a medication. You know, benzodiazepines are the most common one that we see people addicted to, like a Xanax, a Klonopin. Oftentimes what we see with the addicted person is they're not honest with that doctor. When they go in and present their symptoms with that doctor, they're not telling them about the actual reasons behind their anxiety. They're not talking about their addiction issues. They're not talking about how much alcohol they're drinking. They're presenting a set of symptoms, and that doctor is prescribing the right medications for the symptoms presented. But the person is on medications that, in a big picture of things, if we had the right doctor treating them, they wouldn't be on those medications. And then the sort of the last thing is, and I hear this from the addicted individuals all the time, I'm not as bad as. You know, the addicted individual chooses the one person that's worse than them and compares themselves as against that one person that is worse than them. We can always find that one person that's worse. But what I always kind of joke with the addicted individual, you know, they're not comparing themselves to 300 million Americans that aren't as bad as them. Like, it's easy to choose one person that's worse than us and sort of use that as an excuse for our addiction. But we're not benchmarking high, we're always benchmarking low with that.